This is episode 7 in a series of 20. A link to the playlist for this series will be added to the description. Last time we talked about the idea of a lost continent in the Pacific Ocean. We ended with the thought that Sodom and Gomorrah might have been destroyed by something like nuclear weapons. Today we're going to look deeper into the idea that ancient civilizations might have had very advanced technology. After that, we'll start chapter 2. We are often told that people in ancient times were more primitive, but there's a lot of evidence that says otherwise. In fact, some buildings and structures they made were so advanced that it took thousands of years before we could make anything similar. This certainly goes against the mainstream narrative. For example, in Baalbek, in the anti-Lebanon mountains, we find a huge platform made from gigantic blocks of stone. These blocks are so big that even with today's machines, moving them would be really difficult. So why did they use such huge stones when smaller ones would have been much easier to work with? Was there a special reason for this? Could there even be a connection to aliens? The discovery of strange glass pieces called tektites and melted stones at Baalbek has led to some interesting ideas. Some people think the site might have been an ancient spaceport for alien spaceships. In his book Stairway to Heaven, Zecharia Sitchin says Baalbek was part of a larger system created by a group of beings called the Anunnaki, who he believed used it as a spaceport after a great flood. A Russian scientist named Mikhail Agrest also suggested that the giant platform at Baalbek was built for spaceships to land and take off. Furthermore, legend has Phoenician god Baal landed here back in prehistoric times. While this might sound a little far-fetched, many old stories from ancient times mention flying vehicles that seem very advanced. What's even stranger is that these accounts do not date hundreds of years. They date back thousands of years. Agrest even believes the Bible holds clues to support this idea. He thinks the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, the cities destroyed by God for being wicked, might describe something that happened long ago. Most people think natural disasters like earthquakes or floods wiped out the cities, but Agrest has a different idea. He says the rain of fire and brimstone mentioned in the Bible sounds a lot like what happens after a nuclear explosion. Most people agree that the first time atomic bombs were used was during the US bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima on August 6th and 9th, 1945. But scientist Mikhail Agrest thinks that if something like this had happened a long time ago, people might have described the destruction as a rain of fire and brimstone, just like the story in the Bible. Indeed, there are some accounts from the residents of these two cities that do sound eerily like the biblical account of Sodom and Gomorrah. In December 1971, a geologist named Patrick Clayton found strange things called tektites and signs of melted rock, like those at Sodom and Gomorrah in the Libyan desert. Later, Soviet explorers found similar things in the Gobi Desert and Death Valley, between California and Nevada. Strangely, a similar effect can be seen in the ancient forts of Scotland in the UK. The effect was so odd, science writer Arthur C. Clarke suggested they may have been caused by laser-like weapons. Tektites are small pieces of glass that are formed by extreme heat. Some people think they came from a comet, while others say they might have come from volcanic eruptions on the moon. But there's also a theory that these tektites could have come from huge alien spaceships, which might explain why so many have been found in certain places. These fragments seem to have spun really fast before cooling down and landing on Earth. If they did come from spaceships, the large number found in certain areas suggests that these ships must have been huge. Recently, author Bruce Fenton speculated that they may have been caused by a gigantic spaceship exploding over our planet hundreds of thousands of years ago. As we talked about earlier in this series, Russian scientists discovered ancient tools in caves in Turkestan and the Gobi Desert that seem to be used for space navigation. Modern scientists don't know what these strange artifacts were for, but ancient people might have known very well. The explorers who found these objects said they were shaped like half circles, made of glass or porcelain, with a cone-shaped end that had a tiny drop of mercury inside. Mercury plays an important part in powering the Vimanas described in ancient Sanskrit stories. These flying vehicles are often described in great detail, and it's hard to imagine that people thousands of years ago just made these stories up. It seems more likely that they were describing real aircraft that existed long ago. Ancient Indian texts are fascinating and if you ever have the spare time, you should take a look. According to ancient texts like the Ramayana and Dronapava, these Vimanas were shaped like spheres. They moved at incredible speeds and were powered by energy from Mercury. Dilip Kumar Kanjilal, a respected Indian scholar, even suggested they might have used Mercury vortex engines, which are similar to modern electric propulsion systems. He believed that the pilots could fly the Vimanas in any direction and reach amazing heights, maybe even outer space. It should be noted that some of these texts are thought to be 5,000 years old. Another ancient text called the Samarangana Sutradhara talks about iron machines powered by mercury that shot out flames as they flew. These descriptions sound a lot like modern engines. What's even more amazing is that there are hundreds of ancient texts explaining how these flying machines were built and worked. It seems hard to believe that people could have just made up such detailed stories. But if these flying vehicles did exist, where did the knowledge to create them come from? Chapter 2. We've been taught that the further back in time we go, the more primitive people were. This idea is everywhere. It's in books, movies, and documentaries, and all kinds of other media. But is it really true? What if advanced civilizations existed long before us, only to be destroyed by some huge disaster, leaving almost no trace behind? Could it be that we're missing a big part of our history? When new evidence is found that challenges what most people believe, it is often ignored or dismissed. But more and more of this surprising information is coming to light, leading us to question everything we thought we knew about human history. With that, let's start Chapter 2. Remember when people used to think the Earth was flat? Well, you probably don't, because it never was. But believe it or not, there's still a small group of people who think the Earth is flat today. While I enjoy hearing different ideas, this one just isn't true. I think it's come back as a way to make people who question things look silly. Now, whenever someone mentions something important that goes against what we're told, people say, "Oh, I guess you believe the Earth is flat too." But there's a good reason to talk about it. A long time ago, most people actually believed that the Earth was a flat disk at the center of the universe, with everything else revolving around it. The Mesopotamians and Egyptians thought the Earth was a flat disk floating on water, with the sky and clouds above. This was accepted as scientific fact for a long time, and up until the 16th century, many people were still convinced the Earth was flat. Everything changed when scientists like Copernicus and Galileo showed that the Earth is round and actually orbits the Sun in the 16th century. Our planet, it seems, is just one small part of a much bigger universe. So, why talk about this? Well, because it shows that even science, like anything else, can sometimes be wrong and slow to change. Sometimes, scientists ignore evidence that doesn't fit their ideas. They come up with a theory and try to make the facts fit it, almost like they're protecting their own version of the truth. Let's be honest, no one likes admitting they're wrong or having to rewrite everything they thought was true, do they? But if the flat Earth idea was so wrong and still lasted for so long, what else could be wrong? What other ideas that most people accept today might be ignoring important evidence? Could our understanding of how life developed be one of those ideas? Has science really looked at all the evidence, or has it ignored some things just to protect its theories? It's okay to question things. If the science is real, it should be able to handle people asking questions. Believe it or not, there is actually a lot of evidence that challenges the usual story about how humans came to be. In this chapter, we're going to look at some of that evidence. I'm sure you'll learn some new things you've never heard before, probably because they haven't been talked about much. We'll also explore a different theory called divine intervention. This idea suggests that a creator, or maybe even more than one, helped guide the development of humanity at some point. Maybe evolution and divine intervention can both be part of the bigger picture. Even though historians and archaeologists think they know a lot about our past, the truth is that our history has many missing pieces, and there are lots of mysteries we still can't explain. There is so much history we haven't discovered yet, or only partly understand. Thousands of ancient books and writings haven't been translated or studied. Who knows what amazing things we'll learn when we finally get a chance to look at them. Written records have helped us figure out the last 5,000 years, but some of these can be confusing and hard to understand. Others are certainly open to interpretation, but are often assigned mundane actions. Before writing, we mostly rely on rock carvings and cave paintings that go back as far as 40,000 BC. Some of these paintings show hunting scenes, but others are way more mysterious. In fact, some of these artworks show creatures that don't really fit with what we know about the world. The further back in time we go, the harder it is to understand what happened. Before cave paintings, we only have bits and pieces of old rocks and artifacts, many of which are damaged and don't give us clear answers. But sometimes really strange prehistoric artifacts have been found, the kind that get hidden away in museum basements, never to be seen again. When we look at history, we have pretty good records from the Roman and Greek times, but before that, things get fuzzy. A lot of the evidence is tricky to understand, and how it's interpreted usually depends on who is looking at it. Remember, scholars are taught to believe certain facts, and if new evidence doesn't fit with those facts, it often gets reshaped to match what's already accepted. If someone dares to think differently, they might get cast out of the academic world, even if their ideas are correct. A great example of this is Virginia Steen McIntyre. Steen McIntyre found solid evidence at a site in Mexico called Hueyatlaco that showed humans were living there 225,000 years ago. This completely went against the popular belief that humans only arrived in the Americas around 13,000 years ago by crossing the Beringia land bridge. Since her findings did not fit the accepted timeline, other archaeologists ignored her. Eventually, she was forced to leave the field and never returned. Interestingly, new archaeological discoveries are now showing that humans may have been in the Americas much earlier than we thought. One day, the people who dismissed Virginia Steen McIntyre might have to admit that she was right all along. Earth tends to reveal her secrets slowly, but many ancient artifacts have been found. Some suggest early civilizations had technology far beyond what we'd expect. Even more fascinating is how early humans seem to go from living in simple ways to being really advanced almost overnight, using tools that were surprisingly high-tech for their time. These discoveries hint that there may have been a highly advanced world in the distant past, maybe even more advanced than we can imagine. Hundreds of seemingly out-of-place artifacts have been found. Some of the explanations for these discoveries are pretty funny. For example, a gold chain was found 100 feet underground in coal that was estimated to be 250 million years old. Scientists said it must have fallen through a crack to get there. In this series, we'll take a closer look at artifacts like this and explore what they might really mean. There are also ancient structures around the world that don't seem like they could have been built by the people they're credited to. For example, the Serapeum of Saqqara has massive stone coffins called sarcophagi. Egyptologists say workers dragged 200-ton stone blocks over 500 miles, floated them across the Nile River on simple rafts, and cut them so precisely that even today's engineers would have a hard time matching their accuracy. Some people even think this type of precision would require tools as advanced as lasers. And the Serapeum is just one example. There are many more, like the Great Pyramid, the Osirion, and Baalbek in Lebanon, all of which seem way too advanced for the people who supposedly built them. Yet archaeologists often ignore this and instead come up with unlikely explanations to credit these huge constructions to early humans who supposedly had simple tools. Could parts of our history have been hidden on purpose? It might sound like a crazy theory, but there's actually quite a bit of evidence suggesting it could be true. In his book, Mysteries of America, Ted St. Rain shared stories like the one about 8 giant wooden coffins that were supposedly taken by the Smithsonian. Some say these coffins contained the remains of giants, but we may never know, because mysteriously the Smithsonian lost them. This isn't the only time this has happened. There are hundreds of other examples where the Smithsonian has lost or misplaced important artifacts, especially ones that don't match the accepted story of our past. While looking into this, I found so many cases that I started to wonder, is this just bad organization, or is there an effort to keep these artifacts hidden from the public? For example, in the early 1900s, strange artifacts were found in a cave in the Grand Canyon. These discoveries seem to show that thousands of years ago, Egyptians somehow made it to the Americas. The items included tablets with hieroglyphs, pottery, and even mummies. But like in many other cases, these artifacts quickly disappeared from public view. Interestingly, not long after this discovery, a front-page article titled "Explorations in the Grand Canyon" appeared in the Arizona Gazette. It claimed that an expedition led by Professor S.A. Jordan and archaeologist G.E. Kincaid had found evidence of an ancient Egypto-Tibetan culture in the Grand Canyon. Today, large parts of the Grand Canyon are owned by the U.S. government. They are now completely off-limits, even to archaeologists. But why? What's being hidden? Could there still be evidence of ancient Egyptians in the Grand Canyon? Back in 1869, while exploring a remote part of the Grand Canyon on the north side of the Colorado River, a man named John Wesley Powell supposedly found a gold statue, an Egyptian urn, and a small stone disc with detailed carvings. These artifacts were thought to be thousands of years old. Powell, who worked for the Smithsonian, reported the finds. But just like so many other cases, these artifacts mysteriously disappeared without a trace. All across North America, hundreds of ancient mounds have been found. Many were built by cultures we don't know much about. That might not sound too surprising until you hear the stories about what was discovered inside. Some say that skeletons of giants as tall as 12 feet were found. Others talk about strange symbols that suggest these mounds were made by beings who were not like humans we know today. Hundreds of these discoveries were written down, but most of the time, the artifacts were taken by the Smithsonian and never seen again. It makes you wonder, if we could spend just one night exploring their basement, what would we find? Could there be hidden evidence of giants, advanced civilizations, or even aliens? The common belief is that humans slowly evolved from ape-like ancestors to cavemen, and then gradually became the modern societies we know today. People think that we got smarter and more advanced over time through our creativity and hard work. But evidence from archaeology shows that human history hasn't always followed a simple, straight path. In fact, there are signs of major setbacks and even proof of earlier, more advanced cultures in the same places. Take Egypt, for example. Surprisingly, its earliest periods showed more impressive buildings and artistic skills than later ones. Thousands of bowls, vases, and plates were found around the Step Pyramid at Saqqara in the early 20th century. When machinists and engineers studied them years later, they noticed some pretty amazing things. These simple-looking stone objects were actually made using high-precision machines. The artifacts are 5,000 years old, from the pre-dynastic period. Yet they are some of the most finely made objects ever found. They don't fit the usual story of human progress. According to what we've been taught, they shouldn't even exist. What's even stranger is that the quality of craftsmanship actually got worse in later Egyptian times, making these early pieces even more mysterious. Another amazing example is the Great Pyramid on the Giza Plateau. This huge structure was built with incredible precision. While we won't go into all the details just yet, one thing is clear. Nothing built after the Great Pyramid even comes close to matching its craftsmanship. For example, the 300-foot-long passageways are off by only tiny fractions of an inch, something we'd expect to see with modern tools, yet they did it thousands of years ago. This doesn't fit with the idea of slow, step-by-step progress. Instead, it feels like history might work in cycles. We'll talk more about the Great Pyramid in a later episode. Modern Egyptologists often don't give enough credit to the earliest dynasties, but their knowledge and skills were much more advanced than most people think. Definitely more advanced than the later dynasties. The same thing happened with other early civilizations, like the Indus Valley Civilization. This was the largest urban civilization of its time, around the 3rd millennium BC. They were early pioneers in technology that influenced future societies. But once again, the oldest buildings show the best craftsmanship, skill, and precision. Ancient cultures like the Sumerians, Egyptians, Chinese, Hindus, and Greeks were much more scientifically advanced than the ones that came after them. For example, the Chinese figured out how to chrome plate their swords over 3,000 years ago. This technique is difficult to do without using high-tech machines. Unsurprisingly, historians are puzzled by how they managed to do this so long ago. A lot of modern science was actually known in ancient times. In fact, ancient Hindu texts even have detailed instructions on how to build flying machines, thousands of years before the Wright brothers invented the airplane. So where did all this advanced knowledge come from? And just as importantly, Where did it disappear to? A lot of knowledge was lost or forgotten over time. The world went through a dark age, where progress either slowed down or went backwards. It's clear that something big happened in the past. This is a part of history we haven't fully uncovered yet. Or maybe we have, but it's been kept secret. In this case, it might not just be lost history, it could be hidden history too. When we look at the discovery of ancient texts, artifacts, and ruins overall, they suggest that an advanced civilization existed on Earth long before humans as we know them. They had technology way beyond what we can imagine today. Later, when more primitive tribes appeared, they found traces of this advanced society, but didn't know who they were or why they disappeared. As John Keel once said, cavemen inherited the Earth from another, more advanced civilization. Legends, myths, and stories passed down through generations often taught gifts from heavenly beings. These mysterious entities taught early humans important things, such as farming, building, and writing. There are so many of these stories that it's hard to ignore them. Too often, ancient stories are brushed off as superstition, but maybe there's more to them than we think. I believe the ancient people were trying to tell us something important, and we should listen to their message. All around the world, ancient cultures believed that gods arrived during times of chaos, bringing knowledge and civilization to humans. These stories often have two parts. The first, when only gods existed and ruled the earth, and the second, when the gods helped guide the early development of humanity. These stories show up in places like Sumer, Egypt, India, Mexico, Greece, China, Peru, and more. In most of them, the gods cared a lot about people, teaching them the ways of civilization. Stay tuned for episode 8, which will focus on myths and legends from the ancient world.